The evening air carried a hint of rain as Thomas entered the restaurant, shaking droplets from his tailored coat. The soft lighting inside was a welcome change from the harsh fluorescence of the office building he had just left. A deal worth millions had fallen through, and the weight of disappointment hung heavy on his shoulders. "Table for one, sir?" asked the hostess, her smile practiced but pleasant. Thomas nodded, not bothering with words. He followed her to a corner table with a good view of both the entrance and the baby grand piano that sat silently in the opposite corner. The polished black surface gleamed under carefully positioned spotlights. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess said, placing a leather-bound menu before him. Thomas barely acknowledged her as she walked away. His mind was still in the boardroom, replaying the moment when everything had unraveled. He drummed his fingers on the white tablecloth, expensive watch glinting in the candlelight. A few minutes later, a young woman approached his table. She wore the standard uniform of the restaurant staff, crisp white shirt, black vest, and dark pants, but carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her surroundings. "Good evening, sir. My name is Rose, and I'll be taking care of you tonight," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Would you like to hear about our specials?" Thomas looked up, ready to dismiss her with a curt order for scotch when he noticed something unusual. While she spoke to him, her eyes kept drifting toward the piano in the corner. It wasn't obvious, just the briefest glance, but he caught it nonetheless. "Just bring me your best scotch." "Neat," he said. "Of course, sir. And would you like to see the dinner menu as well?" "Fine, whatever." He waved his hand dismissively. As Rose walked away, Thomas found his gaze following her. There was something about her that didn't quite fit. Her hands, he noticed, had long, slender fingers, pianist's hands. And when she returned with his drink, he observed how those fingers held the glass, with a delicate precision that seemed almost artistic. "Are you ready to order, sir?" she asked, notepad poised. "The steak? Medium rare." He took a sip of his scotch, savoring the burn. Then on impulse he added, "Do you play?" "I'm sorry?" Rose looked startled by the question. "The piano." Thomas nodded toward the instrument. "You keep looking at it." A flush of color rose to her cheeks. "Oh, I was just—" "No, I don't play. Not anymore. Would you like any sides with your steak?" Thomas ordered mindlessly, his curiosity piqued by her response. "Not anymore." There was a story there. Throughout the meal, he watched her. Rose moved efficiently between tables, her manner professional and pleasant. But whenever she passed near the piano, there was a subtle change in her demeanor. A tension, a longing, or perhaps both. When she came to refill his water, Thomas found himself saying, "It's a shame no one plays that thing. Seems like a waste." Rose's hand trembled slightly as she poured. "The regular pianist called in sick tonight," she explained. "Sometimes they have someone on weekends, so it just sits there untouched?" Thomas pressed. "I suppose so, sir." As she turned to leave, her elbow caught his water glass. The glass toppled, sending ice water cascading across the table and directly onto Thomas's lap. He jumped up with a startled exclamation. "Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry." Rose grabbed napkins frantically, mortification written across her face. "I'm so sorry, sir." Thomas looked down at his soaked pants, an $800 pair now clinging uncomfortably to his legs. He should have been angry, would have been on any other day. But something about Rose's genuine distress and the strange pull of the piano made him pause. "I'll get the manager right away," she was saying, clearly expecting the worst. "No," Thomas said quietly. Then louder, "No, that won't be necessary." Rose froze, napkins clutched in her hand. "Sir?" Thomas sat back down, dabbing at his pants with a napkin. "Accidents happen." Then he added with a small smile that surprised even himself, "Though I might need some kind of compensation." Her face paled. "Of course, sir. The restaurant will cover your dry cleaning. I was thinking of something else." Thomas nodded toward the piano. "Play something." Rose stared at him, confusion replacing fear. "I told you I don't—" "You said not anymore. That means you did once." Thomas leaned forward. "Play something and we'll call it even. No need to involve managers or dry cleaning bills." The restaurant had grown quieter, nearby tables noticing the commotion and then the unusual conversation. Rose glanced around nervously. "I can't," she whispered. "I haven't played in years." "Not really." "Then this should be interesting." Thomas settled back in his chair, challenge in his eyes. One piece. Your choice. Rose stood frozen, trapped between embarrassment and something deeper, a yearning that Thomas recognized from his own past. Before money and success had buried it, a man in a suit approached, the manager, judging by his concerned expression. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, looking between Rose and Thomas. "Just a small accident," Thomas replied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about. In fact, I was just requesting that Rose play something on your piano." The manager blinked in surprise. "Rose? But she's perfectly capable, I imagine," Thomas interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Extracting several large bills, he placed them on the table. "Consider this payment for the impromptu entertainment." The manager looked at the money, then at Rose's stricken face, clearly torn between protocol and pleasing a wealthy customer. "It's just sitting there unused," Thomas pointed out. "And I'm not asking for a concert, just one piece." Other diners were watching now, curious about the unfolding drama. Rose looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. "It's up to you, Rose," the manager finally said. "If you're comfortable." Rose's eyes darted between the manager, Thomas, and the gleaming piano. For a moment, Thomas thought she would refuse. Then something shifted in her expression, a flicker of determination or perhaps defiance. "One piece," she said quietly. "And then we're even." Thomas nodded, feeling an unexpected surge of anticipation. Rose made her way to the piano, every step seemingly harder than the last. The restaurant had grown almost completely silent, all eyes on the waitress in her work uniform approaching the grand instrument like it might bite her. She sat on the bench, adjusting it slightly with practiced movements that betrayed her familiarity. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling visibly even from Thomas's table. For a long moment she didn't move. Thomas wondered if she would bolt, overcome by stage fright or rusty skills. Then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, almost inaudible. A simple melody, played with the caution of someone testing thin ice. But as the notes continued, they grew stronger, more confident. Thomas recognized the piece, Debussy's Clair de Lune, a challenging choice that revealed both ambition and training. Rose's body began to sway slightly with the music, her earlier stiffness melting away. Her fingers moved with increasing fluidity across the keys, coaxing forth sounds that seemed to transform the entire restaurant. The gentle, dreamy quality of the piece filled the space, washing away the clatter of cutlery and murmur of conversation. Thomas watched, transfixed, as Rose became someone else entirely at the piano. The timid server disappeared, replaced by an artist fully absorbed in her craft. Her face relaxed into an expression of peaceful concentration, occasionally tensing with emotion at particularly moving passages. Other diners had stopped eating, their attention captured by the unexpected performance. Even the kitchen staff had appeared at the doorway, listening with surprised appreciation. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, spontaneously, applause erupted throughout the restaurant. Rose's eyes snapped open as if waking from a dream. A blush spread across her cheeks as she hurriedly stood and gave an awkward bow. Thomas found himself on his feet, clapping with genuine admiration. When Rose's eyes met his across the room, he saw a complex mixture of emotions, embarrassment, yes, but also gratitude and something like awakening. She made her way back to his table, smoothing her vest with nervous hands. "We're even," she said, voice barely audible above the continuing applause. Thomas shook his head. "Not even close." "That was extraordinary." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, please. I think you owe me an explanation along with that performance." Rose glanced at her manager, who nodded his permission, equally curious. Slowly, she lowered herself into the chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. "How does someone who plays like that end up serving steaks?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice gentle despite his directness. Rose looked down at her hands. "Life doesn't always go as planned," she said simply. Thomas waited, sensing there was more to the story. Around them, the restaurant gradually returned to its normal rhythm, though many diners still cast curious glances their way. "I studied at the conservatory," Rose finally continued. "I was good, maybe even great, some said. But then," she shrugged, a small painful gesture, "things happened. Family needed help. Tuition ran out. Dreams got put on hold." "For how long?" Thomas asked. 5 years now." Rose's fingers moved slightly as if playing invisible keys. I keep a small keyboard in my apartment. Play when I can, but it's not the same. Thomas studied her face, seeing both resignation and the embers of a passion not quite extinguished. He thought about the deals he made daily, the millions that passed through his hands, and the strange emptiness that had been growing inside him despite his success. What if, he began, but was interrupted as another server approached. Rose, table 12 needs you, the server said apologetically. Rose nodded and stood. Thank you for the opportunity, she said to Thomas, professional mask sliding back into place. And again, I'm sorry about your suit. As she walked away, Thomas reached a decision. He signaled for the check, adding a tip that would make Rose's eyes widen when she saw it. But that was just the beginning. He pulled out a business card and wrote a note on the back. That performance deserves a proper audience. Call me. Tomorrow would bring possibilities neither of them could imagine tonight. 3 days passed before Rose found the courage to call the number on the business card. She had stared at it countless times, turning it over in her hands during breaks at the restaurant, during quiet moments at home, and late at night when sleep evaded her. The tip Thomas had left still shocked her, enough to cover almost 2 months of rent. But it was the note that truly unsettled her world. That performance deserves a proper audience. Call me. Rose sat on the edge of her bed, phone in hand, staring at the worn keys of the small electronic keyboard that took up most of her tiny apartment. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, casting patterns across the faded carpet. She had been up since dawn, practicing until her fingers ached, old habits returning like faithful friends. With a deep breath, she dialed. Bennett Investments, how may I direct your call? Came a crisp professional voice. Rose nearly hung up. Bennett Investments? The Thomas who had challenged her to play was Thomas Bennett? The name was familiar even to someone like her who paid little attention to business news. Thomas Bennett was the kind of wealthy that appeared on magazine covers. Hello? The receptionist prompted. I'm calling for Mr. Bennett, Rose managed. My name is Rose. He left his card at the restaurant where I work. One moment, please. Rose waited, heart pounding. She almost hoped he wouldn't be available, that she could leave a message and delay whatever this was for another day when she felt more prepared. Rose. Thomas's voice came through clear and direct. I was beginning to think you wouldn't call. I almost didn't, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Thomas chuckled. I appreciate candor. Are you working tonight? Yes, the evening shift. Perfect. I'd like you to meet someone. I'll be at the restaurant at 7. Before she could respond, he added, and Rose, bring sheet music. Something challenging, something you love. The line went dead before she could form a response. Rose looked around her small apartment, eyes landing on the stack of music books she'd kept through the years, unable to part with them even when selling her beloved upright piano had become necessary. She hadn't opened those books in ages, the memories too painful. With trembling hands, she pulled them from the shelf. The restaurant was busier than usual for a Wednesday night. Rose moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere. In her locker in the back room lay her most treasured sheet music, pages worn from years of use. At precisely 7, Thomas walked in. He wasn't alone. Beside him was an older gentleman with silver hair and keen eyes behind stylish glasses. They were seated in Rose's section, but she took a moment before approaching, steadying her nerves. Good evening, Mr. Bennett, she said, trying to keep her voice professional despite the curious glances from her co-workers. Everyone remembered her impromptu performance days earlier. Rose. Thomas smiled. This is Dr. Richard Chen, director of the City Symphony Orchestra and head of the music department at the university. Rose's hands tightened around her notepad. It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Chen. The older man studied her with interest. Thomas tells me you have quite a gift. He's not easily impressed. I'm afraid he's exaggerating, Rose said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. It's been years since I played regularly. And yet you chose Debussy for your first public performance in years, Thomas noted. Not exactly beginner material. Dr. Chen raised an eyebrow. Debussy? Which piece? Claire de Lune, Rose admitted. Interesting choice. Dr. Chen's expression gave nothing away. Thomas has arranged for you to play for me after your shift ends. I hope that's acceptable. It wasn't really a question. Rose glanced at her watch. 3 more hours of her shift remained. "I'll need to check with my manager," she said. "Already taken care of," Thomas replied smoothly. "Now we'll have the special and a bottle of your best red wine." Rose nodded and retreated to the kitchen, mind spinning. The director of the City Symphony? What was Thomas thinking? She wasn't ready for an audition, if that's what this was. She hadn't seriously practiced in years. Throughout her shift, she kept glancing at their table. Thomas and Dr. Chen were engaged in animated conversation, occasionally looking her way. Each time their eyes met hers, Rose quickly looked away. By the time her shift ended, her nerves were frayed. She changed out of her work uniform in the employee bathroom, putting on the simple dress she had brought. Nothing fancy, but better than serving clothes for whatever this meeting would entail. When she emerged, the restaurant had nearly emptied. Only a few late diners remained, along with Thomas and Dr. Chen, who had moved to the table nearest the piano. "Ah, there she is," Thomas said as Rose approached, sheet music clutched to her chest. "We've been waiting patiently." Dr. Chen stood and gestured to the piano. "Shall we?" Rose walked to the instrument, feeling as if she were moving through a dream. The manager had dimmed the main lights but left the piano spotlight bright, creating an impromptu stage. "What will you play for us?" Dr. Chen asked, his tone kind but evaluating. Rose placed her music on the stand, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. It had been her audition piece for the conservatory years ago. She had once known every note by heart, had once played it with the confidence of youth and ambition. "An ambitious choice," Dr. Chen commented, examining the music. "One of my favorites." Rose sat adjusting the bench. Her hands were cold. She flexed her fingers, trying to warm them. "Take your time," Thomas said quietly. Rose closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself. Then she began to play. The opening notes came tentatively, like someone testing unfamiliar terrain. But as the gentle introduction gave way to more complex passages, muscle memory took over. Her fingers remembered what her conscious mind had filed away. There were mistakes. Fingers stumbling over particularly difficult runs, dynamics not quite as controlled as they once had been. But beneath the technical imperfections lay something that couldn't be taught. An emotional understanding of the music. A natural phrasing that breathed life into the notes. As Rose played, the kitchen staff emerged to listen. The few remaining diners stopped their conversations. The manager stood in the doorway, arms crossed but expression softening. When the final notes faded, Rose kept her hands on the keys, afraid to look up and see disappointment on Dr. Chen's face. She knew her performance had been flawed. "Look at me, Rose," Dr. Chen said gently. She raised her eyes to meet his. "When did you stop your formal training?" 5 years ago, she answered. "I was in my 2nd year at the conservatory." "And you've practiced how often since then?" Rose shrugged slightly. "When I can. On my keyboard at home. Maybe a few hours a week, sometimes less." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "You have a rare gift for musical interpretation. Your technique has suffered from lack of proper practice, but that can be remedied. The musicality, that inner understanding of what the composer intended, that's something many technically perfect pianists never achieve." Hope fluttered in Rose's chest, but she tamped it down, too used to disappointment. "What Thomas didn't tell you," Dr. Chen continued, "is that I'm also on the board of the Thompson Music Foundation. We provide scholarships and support to exceptional musicians who face financial barriers." Rose's breath caught. She looked at Thomas, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I don't understand," she said. "What exactly is happening here?" Thomas leaned forward. "When I heard you play, I recognized something I've seen in business. Untapped potential. It bothered me that someone with your talent was serving steaks instead of pursuing their gift." "Not everyone has the luxury of pursuing their passion," Rose said, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. "Which is precisely why the foundation exists," Dr. Chen interjected smoothly. "We'd like to offer you a special scholarship program. Private lessons with me. Access to practice facilities, and eventually, if you progress, as I believe you will, performance opportunities." Rose's hands began to tremble. "I work full-time. I have rent to pay, bills. The scholarship includes a living stipend," Thomas said. "Enough to allow you to reduce your hours here and focus on your music." Rose stood abruptly, overwhelmed. "Why would you do this for a stranger? You don't even know me." Thomas's expression softened. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. 5 years ago, I was in a car accident that nearly killed me. While recovering, I promised myself I'd use my resources to help others find their path. Your playing reminded me of that promise. This isn't charity, Dr. Chen added. This is investment in talent. We expect dedication and hard work in return. Rose looked between them, then at the piano that had briefly allowed her to reclaim a part of herself she thought lost. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, Thomas suggested. Take the information, think it over. Talk to people you trust. Dr. Chen handed her a folder. All the details are in here. My contact information, the scholarship requirements, everything you need to know. Rose accepted the folder with shaking hands. Thank you. I will. I'll think about it. As she gathered her sheet music, Thomas spoke again. Rose, may I ask what made you stop playing? You clearly love it. She paused, considering how much to share with these virtual strangers who were offering to change her life. My mother got sick, she finally said. Cancer. The medical bills piled up. I had to choose my education or her treatment. She shrugged slightly. It wasn't really a choice at all. And now? Dr. Chen asked gently. She's in remission, Rose said, a small smile breaking through. Working part-time herself. Things are stable. Thomas nodded, something like understanding passing between them. Then perhaps it's time for you to return to your path. Rose clutched the folder to her chest, feeling as if she stood at a crossroads. Perhaps it is. As she walked out of the restaurant that night, the weight of possibility pressed against her ribs like a physical thing. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, as if acknowledging that something significant had shifted in the universe. The practice room at the university music building smelled of wood polish and ambition. Rose sat at a gleaming grand piano worth more than everything she owned combined, her reflection distorted in its polished black surface. 6 weeks had passed since that life-changing night at the restaurant, and each day still felt like walking in a dream. She had accepted the scholarship offer after a long talk with her mother. Don't you dare turn this down for me, her mother had insisted, eyes fierce with love. I didn't fight so hard to live just to watch you give up on your dreams again. Now Rose practiced 4 hours daily in this room with its perfect acoustics. Her fingers, once nimble but untrained for years, were regaining their strength and precision. The calluses that had formed from carrying heavy trays were being replaced by the pianist's calluses she remembered from her conservatory days. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Chen entered, his silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight from the tall windows. How are we feeling today? He asked, placing his coffee cup on a side table. Better, Rose replied, flexing her hands. The list isn't fighting me quite as much. Dr. Chen smiled. You've made remarkable progress. Most students who take 5 years away from serious practice wouldn't recover so quickly. Rose ducked her head at the praise. I still have so far to go. Yes, Dr. Chen agreed without sugarcoating it. But you're on the right path. Now, shall we begin? For the next hour, they worked through the technical challenges of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. Dr. Chen was a demanding teacher, stopping her frequently to correct finger positioning or suggest different interpretations of particularly challenging passages. Again, he would say, pointing to a measure, but this time think of it as a question, not a statement. Rose would play it again, trying to hear the music as he did, to understand the conversation between notes rather than just the notes themselves. When the lesson ended, Dr. Chen closed the music book and regarded her thoughtfully. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, he said. The symphony is hosting a special fundraising gala next month. Thomas Bennett is one of our major sponsors. Rose nodded, unsurprised. Thomas had checked in on her progress several times, though always maintaining a respectful distance. We typically feature young artists in a showcase portion of the evening, Dr. Chen continued. I'd like you to perform. Rose's hands froze on the keys. Me? But I'm nowhere near ready for a public performance at that level. You're more ready than you think, Dr. Chen said firmly. Not for a full concerto, certainly, but for one piece that demonstrates your potential. Absolutely, Rose shook her head. The people who attend those galas, they're used to perfection. Professional musicians. Child prodigies, not waitresses with rusty skills. Former waitresses, Dr. Chen corrected with a small smile. Current scholarship recipients. And your skills are polishing up quite nicely." When Rose remained unconvinced, he sighed. "Rose, do you know why Thomas was so insistent I meet you that night? Because he's rich and can do whatever he wants?" Rose suggested, only half joking. Dr. Chen chuckled. "Partially true, but mainly because he recognized something in you that you still don't see in yourself. Authentic musical voice. Technical skill can be taught and refined, but the ability to make listeners feel something, that's rare." He stood gathering his materials. "The gala is in 4 weeks. I've selected Chopin's Nocturne in C minor for you. It's well within your technical capabilities, but emotionally complex enough to showcase your interpretive strengths. Dr. Chen, don't think, practice." He placed the sheet music in front of her. 2 hours daily on this piece in addition to your regular exercises. We'll assess your progress in 1 week. With that, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Rose stared at the music, the familiar notation both comforting and terrifying. A performance at a gala, in front of wealthy donors and music critics and Thomas. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How was your lesson?" Rose typed back. "Good, challenging. Dr. Chen wants me to perform at a gala next month." The reply came almost instantly. "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." Rose smiled despite her anxiety. Her mother's unwavering support had been her anchor through the most difficult times. She turned back to the piano, placing her fingers on the keys. The nocturne began with a somber, introspective melody. Rose played through it slowly, getting a feel for its emotional landscape. As the sunlight shifted in the practice room, casting long shadows across the floor, Rose lost herself in the music. Perhaps Dr. Chen was right. Perhaps she was more ready than she thought. 3 weeks later, Rose wasn't so sure. The gala was just days away, and despite hours of practice, she still felt unprepared. The piece was technically under her fingers, but something was missing. That elusive emotional connection that Dr. Chen insisted made her playing special. After a particularly frustrating practice session, she packed up her things and headed for the exit. As she pushed through the double doors of the music building, she nearly collided with Thomas Bennett. "Oh," she exclaimed, stepping back. "I'm sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." Thomas smiled. "Entirely my fault. I was just coming to find you." Rose tried to smooth her rumpled appearance, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after hours of intense practice. "Dr. Chen mentioned you've been putting in extra hours," Thomas said. "He's impressed with your dedication." "Is he also mentioning how I'm still not ready for this gala?" Rose asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Thomas tilted his head. "Walk with me?" They fell into step together, crossing the university's tree-lined path toward a small campus cafe. "Are you nervous about the performance?" Thomas asked as they walked. "Terrified would be more accurate," Rose admitted. "I keep thinking about all those people, important people, judging me." "They're not judges, they're listeners," Thomas replied. "There's a difference." They reached the cafe and Thomas ordered coffee for both of them. As they sat at a corner table, Rose studied him. In the week since their unusual first meeting, she'd learned more about Thomas Bennett through news articles and university gossip than from the man himself. Billionaire investor, philanthropist, widower. "Why did you really help me?" she asked abruptly. "The truth this time." Thomas seemed taken aback by her directness, but then a smile touched his lips. "The truth? My late wife was a pianist. Not professionally, she taught elementary school music. But she played with such joy." He stirred his coffee slowly. "When I heard you play that night, I saw that same joy fighting to break through years of, what would you call it, dormancy? It reminded me of something I'd forgotten." Rose felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry about your wife." "It was a long time ago," Thomas said, though something in his eyes suggested the time hadn't diminished the loss. "Cancer, like your mother. Except Karen's story had a different ending." Rose nodded, understanding washing over her. "So this is about her?" "No," Thomas said firmly. "This is about music and talent and second chances. Karen would have done exactly what I did if she'd heard you play, probably with more insight and less awkwardness." They both laughed, and Rose felt some of her tension ease. "About the gala," Thomas continued. "I have a suggestion if you're willing to hear it. At this point, I'll take any help I can get. Stop practicing," he said simply. Rose stared at him. "What?" "For the next 2 days, don't touch a piano. Don't think about the gala. Don't worry about the nocturne. Just live. That's terrible advice, Rose protested. I need every minute of practice I can get. Thomas shook his head. Your fingers know the notes. What's missing is the connection. To the music, to yourself, to the reason you play in the first place. He leaned forward. Go visit your mother. Walk in the park. Watch the sunset. Remember what it feels like to be alive. Not just a student preparing for an exam. Then the night before the gala, come back to the music with all of that inside you. Rose wanted to argue, but something in his suggestion resonated with her. The endless hours of technical practice had indeed left her feeling mechanical, disconnected from the emotional core of the music. Dr. Chen would strongly disagree with your approach, she said. Thomas grinned. Which is precisely why I waited until he left for his conference in New York to suggest it. Rose couldn't help but laugh. You're a terrible influence, Mr. Bennett. Call me Thomas, please. And sometimes terrible influences are exactly what we need. As they finished their coffee, Rose found herself agreeing to his unorthodox advice. What did she have to lose? The technical perfection she was striving for wasn't bringing her any closer to the performance she wanted to give. 2 days, she agreed. No piano, just living. Excellent. Thomas stood, checking his watch. I have a meeting to get to, but I look forward to hearing you play at the gala. And Rose, yes, remember why you fell in love with music in the first place. Play for that reason, not for the audience. As she watched him walk away, Rose felt something shift inside her, a realization that perhaps her biggest obstacle wasn't technical proficiency, but the walls she'd built around her own passion to protect herself from disappointment. For the first time since accepting the scholarship, she felt a flutter of excitement rather than dread about the upcoming performance. Maybe, just maybe, Thomas was right. Maybe what her playing needed wasn't more practice, but more life. Following Thomas's advice turned out to be exactly what Rose needed. For 2 days, she stayed away from pianos and practice rooms. Instead, she took her mother to the botanical gardens, where they walked among spring blossoms and talked about everything except music. They laughed about old memories and made plans for the future, simple plans that once seemed impossible during her mother's illness. You seem different, her mother observed as they sat on a bench near a pond watching ducks glide across the water. More at peace, Rose considered this. I think I am. For so long, music was wrapped up with guilt and loss. I gave it up for you, and I never regretted that choice, but it left a hole, her mother finished, squeezing her hand. I know, sweetheart. I always knew, and now, Rose looked at the way sunlight dappled through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the path. Now it feels like coming home, but to a home that's both familiar and new, her mother smiled. That's how it should feel. Later that evening, Rose went to a small jazz club downtown, something she'd never have done during her conservatory days when classical music was all that mattered. She let herself get lost in the improvisations, the way the musicians communicated without words, building on each other's ideas with a freedom she'd never allowed herself. The next day, she hiked to a hilltop overlooking the city, watching as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. As darkness fell and stars appeared, she thought about Chopin, about the nocturne she would play, about night music and dreams and all the emotions that come alive after dark. By the time she returned to the practice room the evening before the gala, something had changed. She sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and played the nocturne from beginning to end without stopping. It wasn't technically perfect. There were still small mistakes, moments where her fingers didn't quite cooperate, but there was a flow, an emotional truth that hadn't been there before. Rose played it again, and then again, each time finding new depths in the music, new ways to express the complex emotions Chopin had woven into the piece. As midnight approached, she finally stopped, her heart full and her mind calm. For the first time since accepting the challenge of the gala performance, she felt ready. The night of the gala arrived with all the intimidating glamour Rose had feared. The symphony hall's grand foyer buzzed with conversations as men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns mingled, champagne glasses in hand. Abstract ice sculptures caught the light from crystal chandeliers, and servers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres too artful to eat. Rose stood in a small side room, peering through a crack in the door at the gathering crowd. Dr. Chen had returned from his conference and was circulating among the guests, stopping frequently to introduce people to each other. You look like you're planning an escape route. Rose jumped at the voice behind her. Thomas stood there immaculate in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, an amused expression on his face. Maybe I am, she admitted, smoothing down her dress, a simple but elegant black gown that had been delivered to her apartment that morning with a note. Every pianist needs a proper performance outfit. Break a leg tonight. TB, how are you feeling? Thomas asked. Terrified, Rose said honestly. But also, ready, I think, Thomas nodded. That's exactly how you should feel. The day you stop being nervous before a performance is the day you should quit. Is that what your wife used to say? Rose asked gently. No, Thomas smiled. That's what Yo-Yo Ma said. Karen used to throw up before every recital, then walk out and play like an angel. Rose laughed, some of her tension dissipating. That's comforting, actually. A stage manager appeared at the door. Ms. Harper, you're on in 5 minutes. Rose took a deep breath. I guess this is it. Before you go out there, Thomas said, remember what we talked about. Play for yourself, not for them. Rose nodded, gathering her courage. As she moved toward the stage door, Thomas added, Oh, and there's someone special in the audience tonight. 3rd row, center, next to an empty seat that's saved for me. Before Rose could ask who he meant, the stage manager was ushering her toward the wings, and Thomas was heading back to the main hall through another door. The Young Artists Showcase was the middle segment of the evening's program, featuring 4 talented musicians performing brief selections. Rose was scheduled to go last. She waited in the wings, listening as a violinist, a cellist, and a soprano each performed to appreciative applause. Then it was her turn. The MC announced her name, mentioning the Thompson Music Foundation scholarship and her return to music after a hiatus. Rose walked onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding her. As her eyes adjusted, she looked out at the audience, a sea of faces most unfamiliar. Her gaze found Thomas in the 3rd row. Beside him sat her mother, looking beautiful in a blue dress Rose had never seen before, her eyes shining with pride. Rose's heart swelled. Of course, the someone special Thomas had mentioned. He must have arranged for her mother to attend, knowing how much it would mean to both of them. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands in her lap for a moment, centering herself. The hall was absolutely silent, hundreds of people waiting for her to begin. Rose closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the past 2 days, the gardens, the jazz club, the sunset. She thought of her mother's courage during her illness, of Thomas's grief for his wife, of Dr. Chen's belief in her talent. She thought of all the emotions that make up a life, joy and sorrow, love and loss, fear and hope. Then she began to play. The nocturne in C minor opened with a haunting melody, melancholy yet beautiful. Rose played with a gentle touch, letting the music breathe as it unfolded. As the piece progressed into its more complex middle section, her fingers moved with newfound confidence, shaping each phrase with intention and feeling. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore, or about the audience, or even about proving herself. She was simply telling a story through Chopin's notes, a story about darkness and light, about finding beauty and sadness, about resilience and transformation. The final section returned to the opening theme, but with subtle variations that suggested acceptance and peace. Rose played the closing measures with a delicate touch, letting the final notes linger in the air before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then the audience erupted into applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause that rose to a standing ovation. Rose stood and bowed, her eyes finding her mother, who was wiping away tears while clapping furiously. Beside her, Thomas was smiling broadly, his own applause vigorous and proud. Dr. Chen appeared from the wings, joining Rose on stage and presenting her with a bouquet of flowers. He leaned in to whisper, "That was magnificent. You found it, the heart of the music." As Rose took another bow, she felt a sense of completion, as if a circle had closed. 5 years ago, she had walked away from this world, believing it lost to her forever. Now she had returned, not as the same person she'd been before, but as someone new, someone who understood that music wasn't about perfection but about connection. Backstage after the performance, her mother embraced her tightly. "My beautiful, talented daughter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I always knew you'd find your way back." I couldn't have done it without you, Rose replied. Your strength gave me mine. Thomas hung back, giving them their moment. When Rose finally turned to him, words failed her. How could she thank him adequately for what he'd done? Don't, he said, seeming to read her thoughts. Tonight wasn't about gratitude or debts. It was about music, pure and simple. Dr. Chen joined them, still beaming with pride. The director of the Philharmonic was here tonight, he said. He'd like to meet you, and the dean of the conservatory is asking about your interest in completing your degree. Rose's head spun with possibilities that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. I don't know what to say. Say nothing yet, Dr. Chen advised. Tonight is for celebrating. Tomorrow we can discuss your future. As they made their way to the gala reception, Rose felt as if she were walking on air. The future stretched before her, full of promise and possibility. But more importantly, the present moment was perfect. Her mother healthy and proud by her side, her music restored to her heart, and the unexpected friendship of a man who had dared her to remember who she truly was. Sometimes, Rose reflected, the most important turning points in life come disguised as small moments. A spilled glass of water, a dare accepted, a chance to play again after years of silence. She had no idea where this new path would lead, but for the first time in years she was eager to find out. 1 year later, Rose stood in the wings of Carnegie Hall, hardly believing where life had taken her. The journey from restaurant waitress to concert pianist had been filled with more hard work, tears, triumphs, and growth than she could have imagined that fateful night when a wealthy man dared her to play. After the gala performance, everything had accelerated. With Dr. Chen's guidance and Thomas's continued support, Rose had been accepted back into the conservatory with a full scholarship. She had completed her degree in record time, practicing relentlessly while performing at smaller venues to build her confidence and reputation. Now she was about to make her professional debut at one of the world's most prestigious concert halls. The program included works by Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff, challenging pieces that showcased her technical skill and emotional depth. Her name was on posters throughout the city. Critics from major newspapers would be in attendance. It was everything she had once dreamed of and then reluctantly abandoned. 5 minutes, Miss Harper, the stage manager said, clipboard in hand. Rose nodded, smoothing the midnight blue gown she wore. Her mother had helped her choose it during a special shopping trip last week. You look beautiful, came a familiar voice. Rose turned to see Thomas approaching, elegant as always in his tuxedo. Their friendship had deepened over the past year, evolving into something neither had expected. He had become her most trusted advisor, her biggest supporter, and eventually something more. Though both were taking that part slowly, mindful of the complicated emotions involved. Nervous? He asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Terrified, Rose admitted with a small laugh, but the good kind of terrified. Like standing at the edge of something wonderful. Thomas smiled. I brought you something. He held out a small velvet box. Rose opened it to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny piano. It was Karen's, Thomas said quietly. She wore it for every performance. I think she'd want you to have it now. Rose's eyes filled with tears. Thomas, I can't. You can, he said firmly. She believed music should be passed on, shared. Like you're doing tonight. As Thomas fastened the bracelet around her wrist, Rose felt a strange sense of connection, not just to him and to Karen's memory, but to all the musicians who had stood where she was standing, feeling what she was feeling. Your mother is in the front row, Thomas said. Dr. Chen too. And there's a surprise. Some of your old co-workers from the restaurant came. They pooled their tips to buy tickets. Rose laughed through her tears. You're kidding. Not at all. They're very proud of their piano-playing waitress. The stage manager returned. It's time, Ms. Harper. Thomas squeezed her hand. Remember what we always say? Rose nodded. Play for the joy of it. The rest will follow. As Thomas headed back to his seat, Rose took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was bright, the applause welcoming. She walked to the magnificent grand piano at center stage, adjusted the bench, and looked out at the audience. There in the front row sat her mother, healthier now than she'd been in years, her face shining with pride. Beside her was Dr. Chen, his usual serious expression replaced with an encouraging smile. Thomas sat on her mother's other side. giving Rose a subtle nod of confidence. And there, a few rows back, were her former restaurant colleagues. The hostess who had always covered for her when she needed to leave early for practice, the chef who had snuck her leftovers to take home, the manager who had allowed her to play that first night. They looked somewhat out of place among the regular concert-goers, but their presence touched Rose deeply. She turned to the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. Rose returned to the stage for 3 encores, the final one being Claire de Lune, a nod to where her journey had begun. As the last notes faded into silence, she felt a profound sense of completion. Backstage after the concert was a whirlwind of congratulations, flowers, and introductions to important figures in the music world. Critics approached with praise, already drafting reviews that would use words like revelation and authentic voice. A recording company executive pressed a business card into her hand. Dr. Chen beamed with the pride of a mentor whose student had exceeded all expectations. When the crowd finally thinned, Rose found herself in a quiet corner with Thomas and her mother. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," her mother said, embracing her. "Not just for tonight, but for your courage, for never giving up even when it seemed impossible." "I learned that from you," Rose replied, holding her mother tight. When they separated, Thomas handed Rose a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," he toasted, "and to unexpected dares," Rose added with a smile. As they sipped their champagne, Thomas grew more serious. "There's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. The Thompson Music Foundation has been doing good work, but I think we could do more." Rose tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Your story made me realize how many talented musicians might be out there, sidelined by circumstances beyond their control. I'd like to expand the foundation's mission, create more scholarships, establish a mentoring program, maybe even open a community music school in underserved areas." "That sounds wonderful," Rose said. "I'd like you to be part of it," Thomas continued. "Not just as a beneficiary or a success story, but as a partner, someone who understands both the struggle and the passion." Rose was taken aback. "Me? But I'm just starting my career. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know what matters. The music, the people, the difference it can make. The rest we can figure out together." Thomas glanced at Rose's mother, who was watching them with knowing eyes. "If you're interested, that is." Before Rose could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of her former restaurant manager. "Sorry to intrude," he said, "but we wanted to say goodbye and congratulations again before heading out." "I'm so glad you all came," Rose said warmly. The manager smiled. "Wouldn't have missed it. You know that night when Mr. Bennett here dared you to play? I almost said no. Thought it would disrupt the restaurant." "Good thing you didn't," Thomas remarked. "Best decision I ever made," the manager agreed. "The restaurant's doing better than ever, by the way. We tell your story to all the customers. Even put a plaque on the piano, where Rose Harper's journey began." After he left, Rose turned back to Thomas, considering his offer. It was tempting to focus solely on her burgeoning career, the concerts, recordings, and tours that now stretched before her. But something about his vision resonated deeply with her own experience. "I'd like to help," she decided. "I can't promise how much time I can give, but if my story can open doors for others..." Thomas's face lit up. "That's all I ask. We'll start small, perhaps a series of benefit concerts featuring young artists in situations similar to yours." Rose's mother, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Maybe I could help too. I'm feeling stronger these days, and I've always been good with organization." As they discussed possibilities, Rose felt a sense of purpose extending beyond her own success. Music had always been her personal passion, but now it could become something more, a way to connect, to give back, to create opportunities for others as others had done for her. Later that night, after the celebrations had ended, Rose returned to her apartment. It was a modest place. She had insisted on managing her own finances responsibly despite her changing circumstances. But it had one luxury, a beautiful upright piano by the window. She changed out of her concert gown into comfortable clothes and sat at the piano, not to practice or perform, but simply to play for herself. As her fingers moved across the keys, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year, from waitress to concert pianist, from giving up dreams to reclaiming them, from solitary struggle to meaningful connections. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the lamplight as she played, reminding her of all the invisible threads that connect people's lives. How one person's dare can change another's destiny. How loss can eventually lead to new beginnings. How music can build bridges between worlds that seem far apart. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like stars. Inside, the music filled her apartment. Not the structured perfection of her concert performance, but something more intimate and free. Rose played whatever came to mind, letting the melodies flow from classical to jazz to simple improvisations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, concerts to prepare for, foundation work to begin, relationships to nurture.